Today we're going to discuss a story about a female pedophile written by a French Nazi sympathizer who was a friend of Coco Chanel and Marcel Proust. I know. Dullsville. Better than food, man. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Hope you guys are all doing well. This is my first nighttime or early morning review. If you're easily disturbed or triggered, I'd suggest that you move on, but you probably already know that by now. Like Bret Easton Ellis said, ideology does not trump aesthetics. In fact, when you try and make art entirely safe, I believe you are doing everybody a disservice, and it is a mistake, in my opinion, to ignore good art made by supposedly bad people. If this was shock for shock's sake, then I wouldn't be interested. Despite the actions of our insidious antagonist Clotilde, who remains in the shadows and is only sketched in broad strokes by our narrator for most of the book, American Psycho, this ain't. There are no descriptions of graphic transgression to be found. None. There's only one other fictional novel about a female pedophile that I'm aware of, which is a book called Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, who went to school with Deborah LaFave, the teacher who had sex with that 14-year-old boy several years back and got very famous because she was very attractive. And the book is all about that. Haven't read it, not really interested, but it's a book that has a surprising number of reviews on YouTube and has kind of entered the mainstream. They're calling it the new Lolita? I doubt it. This is nothing like Lolita, and I guarantee you have not read anything like this. It's not a widely available book, and it's certainly not widely discussed. Though, very interestingly, as you can read in this new Criterion article, Paul Morand was once on the literary top. He was once at the top of the literary scene and then vanished. Knew everybody in high society, as the article puts it. He had like Oscar Wilde and Sarah Bernhardt were at his house. When he grew up, he knew people like Marcel Proust and Winston Churchill. So what happened? Well, he made some bad decisions, and that's probably why you haven't heard of him. Since there's no really unawkward time to bring up Paul Morand, I'm going to use the segue of Proust, because they were very good friends. One of the funniest things I read was that Paul's first novel was criticized by Proust for being like overly floral or delicate or excessive or something, which was hysterical because, it was like the exact feeling I had reading Proust the first time. Regardless, there's a published edition now with a preface written by Proust. Jean Cocteau, the surrealist filmmaker, was a friend of Paul's, and Josette Day, who played Beauty in the very famous French version of Beauty and the Beast, was his mistress and protege. So there's a lot of strange intersections with people that you're probably already familiar with, and it only gets more intricate the deeper we dig. What happened was Morand was seduced by fascism and became a big supporter of the Vichy regime. The new Criterion article says, like so many of his countrymen, he thought that nothing could prevent German hegemony. And in any case, as he wrote in an article of 1941, he admired the patriotism, the vitality, the Nietzschean, tragic, and Dionysian feeling of life displayed by the Nazi invaders when compared with the hedonism and weakness of the French. The irony of his condemnation of French hedonism appears to have escaped him, because he was a total dandy. There's even a line in there about Morand and his wife inviting Ernst Junger to dinner at Maxime's. I'm not sure if he wrote On the Marble Cliffs at that point, but it would be interesting to know. So after the war, he goes and hides in Switzerland and Tangier. Hecate and her dogs is pre-Naked Lunch, but right after the other famous Tangier resident Bill Burroughs killed his wife and published Junkie. Even when I started this review, I had no clue of these overlaps. All these people knowing the same people, the world got very small. I should note also the structure of this physical book is like the best I've seen. It's fantastic. This one from Pushkin Press. Some of these chapters are only one line, and I love this. So this is a story. A banker recalls his love affair with a married woman, Clotilde, in North Africa. Take life as it comes is her motto. In the beginning, everything is perfect. In fact, the descriptions of a satisfying, quiet, tranquil relationship are some of the best that I've ever read. Love is horribly time-consuming, which is why it flourishes best in the provinces. In Paris, everything puts you in mind of love. Women's dresses, the perfumes, the food, the theaters, but no one has time for it there. You only have to look at the novels read by our forefathers, and they knew a thing or two about love. Thinking of it, preparing for it, meeting each other, waiting for each other, thinking the same things, living at the same tempo. It filled your whole life. But with Clotilde, everything was much simpler. Our love life fed on itself. We understood each other perfectly without having to speak a word, in the same mysterious way that animals have. To reconstitute our conversations would be more or less impossible, for we remained entombed in interminable silences, which were given meaning by looks which lasted as long as our kisses, the pressure of our hands — she had the hot hands of indifference — our caresses. Words are for people who have nothing to say to each other. Such perfect peace in a world in ferment did not ring entirely true. There were moments when I had a vague sense that someone or something was setting a trap for me. Life is not charitable, I would think. You can force it to yield scraps of happiness, but if left to itself, it will never give you anything. The sun or moon entering through the slats in the blinds stenciled the wall with braided traceries of gold or silver, which seemed somehow too rich, too fine, too uncomfortable for the Puritan in me. I stared at them so much that I could stand it no longer and turned my back on them. I had been raised surrounded by the mean-minded wealth, penny-pinching and carefully measured, of God-fearing Protestant circles. Things with no price tags, things that came too easily, worried me. I felt I was forever signing checks that would bounce. I knew that if all you had to do was clap your hands and a tray would appear weighed down with everything you could possibly want, then Satan would be the one carrying it. A premonition? An ancestral survival? Eventually the last shreds of these northern mists grew threadbare and drifted away. My heart overflowed. My body took its gratifications without a second thought. I gave myself up to a prodigious wonderment, paralyzed by the heat, as others are by the cold. But, of course, things get pretty strange pretty quick. He begins to witness these bizarre and unsettling moments in her actions. Once, when they're in a theater watching a film with a scene at an orphanage, she lets out this guttural moan, like she's having a spontaneous orgasm. And then she starts talking obscenely in her sleep, and then he finds young North African children helping her out around the house, and he starts putting it together, and he's like, oh God, she's a pedophile. Or so he believes, because he never catches her in the act. The theater scene is the most outrageous in the book, and it would be difficult to suspend the reader's disbelief if the scene wasn't so strategically and tactfully handled. What results, of course, is the classic descent into obsession and hell. He goes from this erotic obsession with her to completely detesting and loathing her, but still needing her. The odious thrill of relief I felt the moment she was no longer in my arms deserved to be consigned to immediate oblivion. I felt despair to see someone I loved sinking into such depravity. Although its center was most likely located outside consciousness, it was nevertheless an appalling form of moral degeneracy. I have said that my childhood was in no way impure. For all the fondlings, dreams, friendships, chance encounters, newspapers, photographs, in short, all the paraphernalia which attend the eroticism of our adolescent years, none of my nerve centers had been tainted. It was my healthy temperament that made my gorge rise. Shame and anguish vanquished anger. The idea of loving and continuing to love a woman for whom normal carnal relations had become something unnatural filled me with gloom and disgust. But I was beginning to need that disgust more and more. That's just one line right there. One chapter. But I was beginning to need that disgust more and more. The brevity of the chapters in this book's structure add to the urgency of the narrative. I think it's great. I think it's excellent. The new Criterion article goes on to call Paul Morand a Proustian snob and salon Nietzschean. Apparently he remained careless of the suffering of so many ordinary human beings under totalitarianism, and ends with, there is also a warning to be drawn from Morand's writings and destiny about the consequences of failing to acknowledge what is truly valuable and life-enhancing in our culture. You could look at the priority of decadence in Morand's life and realize that he was obviously focusing on the wrong things. And the interesting part is that's exactly what happens to our character in the book. So much so that many have speculated that this book is just one very thinly veiled metaphor for Morand's relationship with fascism. It makes total sense. It's fairly simple. A man falls in love with someone only to realize they're a monster. Whether or not that's the case, I find it stands on its own. The writing is definitely more Hemingway than Proustian. It's way more in the realm of It's very pessimistic, though. It's more pessimistic than Hemingway, so I think it's more in like the realm of like Céline, the author of Journey to the End of the Night. And there was an article in The Guardian by Nicolas Lazare that said Céline said in the year 2000 the only other contemporary author who would be read, apart from Céline, of course, would be Morand. Now those two kids are a match made in hell. It all comes out in the end. I'm not surprised at all that they knew one another. Not surprised at all. Lazare believes that the novel is about collaboration, as the narrator continues to go along with Clotilde's crimes implicitly, sort of guilty by association. Though again, we're never really sure if they are happening or not. It's never told, it's all implied, and that is the book's strength. That makes it very unsettling. By not telling us enough about either of the characters, and even disclosing the location, we're forced to guess constantly and read into their actions the way the man in the story reads into hers. In fact, now that you know more about Paul Morand, you begin to wonder as you'll read this, is he a trustworthy narrator? Is he not just manipulating you and actually he's the villain of the story? You begin to wonder these things. The sheer fact that it manages to pull off this narrative is impressive. The subject matter is provocative, but if the writing wasn't excellent, if the structure and mystery didn't keep the whole thing together, then it would fall apart in one sentence. It's an atmospheric, strange novel about a man's descent into obsession. It's mysterious and perverse. It does not play by the rules. It is a total backlash against expectation. 1954, again, published in 1954. The most shocking thing about Hecate and her dogs is not the idea of this attractive French woman molesting North African children that she keeps around. The shocking thing is that this character finds himself in love with her in spite of this, simultaneously fearing, despising, and falling deeper into obsession, passively complicit in her crimes, if they're being committed. The book is small and unassuming. It doesn't quickly reveal its darkness. The romance, the relationship is like this contracted disease that unfolds as time goes on, blossoming like a cancer until you realize that you're terminally ill. The absence of description is what creates this Roman Polanski-like tension, an insidious creeping shadow in the back of the mind that slowly corrodes this tranquil romance. Hecate is a Greek goddess who had dogs sacrificed to her, so that's the illusion that Paul Morand is making between the woman, Clotilde, and her victims, Hecate and her dogs. And this is a painting by William Blake on the cover, I discovered. I'm going to tell you the ending. I think it's great. I think the last line is chilling. He escapes from her and he travels and he actually meets her husband, who's been away this entire time. And it's never explicitly stated that her husband suspected the same thing or was complicit in the same things as he was, but it's definitely implied. The husband has said he's paying off debts. He says, gambling debts? Debts from the big game. What do you mean? Wicked deeds, stains on body and soul. So he's trying to escape from her. He's met her husband and he's trying to escape from her as well. Obviously has some sort of guilt that he's running from. So then the narrator actually meets her years later at a party in New York, at a dinner party. And he reveals to her that he's actually met her husband in his travels. And this is the last line. She shied away and began to tremble. Then her face creased into a scowl. Her eyes turned to green, and I beheld Hecate. God, that's a great ending. So if you're into any of the French authors that I've mentioned on this channel, Proust, Bataille, Genet, of course, this is much more in line with like the gothic atmosphere of Umberto Eco or Huysmans crossed with Paul Bowles than it is with like Sade or Henry Miller. Alright, you guys have been warned. Always remember that life is far too short to read bullshit. Subscribe and donate if you can. Hope you guys are doing very well, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Ciao. Better than food, man.